It was a crisp winter morning when I felt the first contraction. I'd been anticipating this day for months, counting down the days until I could finally meet my baby. Michael, my husband, had been by my side through it all: appointments, shopping for baby clothes, painting the nursery. He'd been an eager participant in the whole pregnancy journey, and I could see the excitement in his eyes. I thought we were ready. I thought we had everything figured out. The hours passed slowly in the hospital room. The pain intensified, but I kept telling myself that it was all worth it. I could do this. Michael, ever the calm and steady presence, held my hand and whispered reassuring words. But despite the quiet encouragement, I felt an overwhelming sense of uncertainty, an undercurrent of doubt I hadn't expected. The closer I got to the moment of delivery, the more I found myself wondering if I was really ready for the changes that would come. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the moment arrived. The doctors and nurses hurried in, and I could feel Michael's grip tighten as the contractions peaked. But it wasn't the pain or the fear that I found myself focusing on, it was the thought of what would happen next. The moment my baby was born, everything would change. I wasn't just going to be Sarah anymore, I would be a mother, and Michael would be a father. Our relationship would shift in ways neither of us could predict. When Ethan finally made his entrance into the world, it was as if time stopped. I felt his tiny body being placed on my chest, and for a brief moment, everything was perfect. I could hear the faint sound of his cries, his little arms flailing in the air as I held him close. But as I looked down at him, something unexpected caught my eye. Jake, my ex-boyfriend, was standing at the door, nervously awaiting his turn to meet the baby. Jake and I had broken up years ago, but we had remained close friends. He was a constant in my life, always someone I could rely on, even if we weren't romantically involved anymore. He and Michael had never been the best of friends, but they had always managed to tolerate each other. It was awkward at times, but I thought that, for the sake of the baby, we could put our differences aside. The nurse turned to me, asking who would hold the baby first. Michael, as usual, looked calm and composed, his eyes locked on me as I held Ethan. I knew how badly he wanted to be the first to hold our son. But then I glanced at Jake, standing by the door, and something in me shifted. I'd always seen Jake as a part of my life, someone who had been there for me through so many ups and downs. And I wanted him to be part of this moment, too. Michael, I think it would mean a lot to Jake if he could hold Ethan first, I said, glancing over at my husband. I was surprised at how nervous I felt asking him, but Michael simply nodded, his face unreadable. I didn't know if he was just trying to be agreeable or if he truly didn't mind. Either way, it didn't seem like a big deal to me at the time. Jake walked over slowly, his face softening as he gazed down at the tiny baby in my arms. He hesitated for a moment before carefully taking Ethan from my hands. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like something important, an acknowledgement that Jake was part of this new chapter in my life, even if he wasn't the father. He cradled the baby with such tenderness, and I couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude for the way he had supported me all these years. As I watched Jake hold my son, I realized I had never truly seen him in this light before. There was something undeniably sweet and selfless about his presence in that moment. It was just one of those things you don't expect, the way someone who used to be so close to you can still be a part of your life in such an unexpected way. Michael watched silently, his face neutral, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was simmering beneath the surface. As much as I wanted to believe that he was okay with my decision, part of me wondered if there was more to his reaction than he was letting on. But I pushed the thought aside. This was supposed to be a joyous occasion, a celebration of new life. I couldn't let the tension between my past and my present cloud the moment. At that moment, everything seemed so simple. I had a baby in my arms, and the people who mattered most were there to support me. But little did I know, that decision, the one I thought was so innocent and kind, was about to set into motion a series of events I couldn't have anticipated. In the days that followed Ethan's birth, I tried to adjust to the whirlwind of emotions and responsibilities that came with being a new mom. The hospital visits, the sleepless nights, the endless stream of baby clothes and diapers, it was a blur. Michael and I were still finding our rhythm, learning how to balance our roles as parents while maintaining our relationship. But something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the excitement that had once been there between us seemed to be fading, replaced by a subtle tension that I couldn't ignore. At first, I chalked it up to the stress of becoming parents. It wasn't uncommon for couples to go through a rough patch after the birth of a child. I reminded myself that we needed time to adjust. But as the days went by, I began to notice small things that didn't sit right with me. Michael, who had always been affectionate and loving, seemed distant. He was still present, still helping with Ethan, but there was an emotional distance that was hard to ignore. When I looked at him, I saw a man who was physically there but mentally somewhere else. One evening, as I was feeding Ethan, Michael sat beside me on the couch, his phone in hand. I could tell he wasn't really paying attention to me or the baby. He wasn't even looking at Ethan, who was cooing and kicking his little legs in my arms. Instead, he was scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up with a distracted smile. It wasn't that he didn't love our son, it was more like he was just going through the motions, his mind elsewhere. I tried to break through the silence. "Michael, are you okay? You seem a little off lately." He glanced at me for a moment before returning his attention to his phone. "I'm fine," he muttered, though his tone didn't match his words. "Just tired, I guess." But I knew that wasn't the full story. Michael had always been a man of few words, but this felt different. He was usually so engaged with me, so eager to talk about his day, to share his thoughts. Now, it was as if he was pulling away, retreating into himself. And it wasn't just during the quiet moments at home, it was everywhere. When we had visitors, like my mom or friends, Michael would sit in the corner, barely participating in conversations. He smiled, he nodded, but his eyes never seemed to meet anyone's. And when Jake came over to see the baby, it was the same. Jake had been one of the first people to hold Ethan after he was born, and I had expected that maybe Michael would feel a little uncomfortable with that. But instead, he barely acknowledged Jake's presence, his eyes cold and distant whenever he spoke to him. At first, I thought maybe I was just being overly sensitive. After all, I had just given birth, and my emotions were all over the place. I didn't want to jump to conclusions or make a big deal out of nothing. But the more I tried to reach out to Michael, the more he withdrew. It was as if he had built a wall around himself, one that I couldn't break down. One night, when I was getting Ethan ready for bed, I caught Michael staring at me from the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made my stomach twist. He didn't say anything at first, just watched me for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "Did you really have to let him hold Ethan first?" His voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it, something I hadn't expected. I turned to face him, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Michael, it was just a gesture. Jake is a part of my life, and I thought it would mean something to him. You know that it wasn't about replacing you." But Michael didn't look convinced. He just nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I don't know, Sarah. I'm just not sure about this. About everything." His words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. I had expected him to be tired or overwhelmed, but I hadn't expected him to voice his doubts so openly. There was something in his voice that made me feel like I was losing him, like the foundation of our relationship was beginning to crumble. The next few days were filled with awkward silences and strained conversations. I could tell that Michael was pulling away, not just emotionally but physically as well. He wasn't the man I had married, the man who had once made me feel safe and loved. I couldn't understand why he was shutting me out, why he was suddenly so distant. And then there were the little things that kept nagging at me, his growing irritability when I tried to talk about the baby, the way he would avoid looking at me when I brought up plans for the future, the way he stopped being involved in the little things. He wasn't just withdrawing from me, he was withdrawing from everything. I began to wonder if it was because of the decision I'd made, the choice to let Jake hold Ethan first. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I had unknowingly crossed a line that I didn't even know existed. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than just that. Michael's behavior was a symptom of something deeper, something that I was afraid to face. The days turned into weeks, and the distance between Michael and I grew wider. I tried everything I could think of to reconnect, to bring back the warmth we had before Ethan was born. But no matter what I did, nothing seemed to work. It was as if we were two strangers sharing a house rather than a married couple raising a child together. Michael's behavior was growing more erratic, and I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my chest that something was terribly wrong. One evening, after a particularly difficult day with Ethan, I found myself sitting in the living room, watching Michael as he silently sipped his drink, staring blankly at the TV. It had been the same routine for days now. He would come home from work, barely acknowledge me, and spend the evening either scrolling on his phone or watching shows he'd long since stopped enjoying. I had tried to make small talk, asking about his day, but each time, he'd give me short, disinterested answers, his focus never fully on me. I had to know. I had to ask. "Michael," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what's going on? Why are you acting like this?" He didn't look up from his phone, his fingers scrolling aimlessly. "What do you mean?" he replied, his voice flat. "You know exactly what I mean," I said, my frustration rising. "You're distant. You barely talk to me anymore. It's like you're not even here." "I'm trying, Michael, but it feels like you don't care about us anymore." He let out a sigh, setting the phone down on the coffee table, his gaze finally meeting mine. There was something in his eyes, something that made my heart drop. It wasn't anger, but something deeper, something sadder. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "I don't know how to do this anymore, Sarah," he said quietly, his voice strained. "I'm trying, but it feels like I'm failing. I don't know if I'm cut out for this whole family thing." My chest tightened at his words. I wasn't sure if I'd heard him correctly. "What do you mean? You're the father of our son. You're the one who wanted this life with me." He shook his head slowly, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Yeah, but I didn't realize what it would really mean. I didn't know how much of myself I'd lose in the process. I thought it would be different, that I could handle it. But it's too much." I stared at him, unable to process his words. I wanted to say something, to make him understand how much his words were hurting me, but I was speechless. What had happened to the man I had fallen in love with? The man who had promised to be by my side through everything, no matter what. "I just don't know if I can be the man you want me to be anymore," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought I was ready for this, but now I'm not so sure. I feel like I'm drowning, and the more I try to keep my head above water, the more I sink." My heart ached for him. I could see the torment in his eyes, the guilt and confusion. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the anger that was bubbling up inside me. We were in this together. We had made this choice together. And yet, here he was, acting as though he was the only one struggling, the only one feeling the weight of it all. I stood up, feeling a rush of emotions flooding my chest. "I didn't sign up for this, Michael," I said, my voice shaking. "I didn't ask for this distance, for you to shut me out. I've been trying, I've been holding it together for both of us. But I can't do it alone. You have to meet me halfway. I can't keep carrying this on my own." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret, but there was something else too, something that scared me. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, his voice trembling. "But I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say or do next. How had we gotten here? How had the man I married, who once made me feel so loved and cherished, become someone who couldn't even look me in the eye without feeling guilty? It was clear to me now. Michael was falling apart, and I had no idea how to save him. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't the one who needed saving. I wasn't the one who had changed. I had become a mother, yes, but I was still the same woman who had loved him, who had trusted him with my heart. And I wasn't going to let him pull away without a fight. "Michael," I said, my voice firm, "if you don't want this, if you don't want us, then you need to tell me. Because I'm not going to keep chasing after someone who's already left." He looked at me, his face pale, and for a moment, I thought he might say something to reassure me. But instead, he just sat there, silent. And in that silence, I knew that whatever was happening between us, it was something deeper than I could fix. The days following our conversation were filled with tension, each moment feeling more like a countdown than a natural flow of life. Michael's distance grew, his words became fewer, and his actions more erratic. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was coming, something neither of us were prepared for. I tried to convince myself that it was just a rough patch, that with time, things would return to normal. But deep down, I knew we were slipping further apart with each passing day. It was on a quiet afternoon, just a few days before our anniversary, that the inevitable happened. I had just finished feeding Ethan when I noticed Michael pacing in the living room, his eyes locked on the floor as if searching for something he couldn't find. I watched him for a few moments, my stomach sinking as the realization hit me, he was preparing to say something. Something that would change everything. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and barely audible. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah." His words were like a slap in the face, each one sharper than the last. I froze, unable to respond at first. I had known this was coming, but hearing it aloud, hearing him say it, felt like a betrayal I couldn't comprehend. I had never imagined that the man I married would be the one to walk away. "What do you mean?" I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. "You can't just leave. We're married, Michael. We have a son." He ran his hand through his hair, his eyes filled with frustration and confusion. I know we have a son. But I'm not the man you need me to be. I'm not the man I thought I was. I can't pretend that everything is okay when it's not. I'm not cut out for this, for us." I shook my head, the words choking me as I tried to process what he was saying. "What are you saying? You're just going to walk away? From me? From Ethan?" He looked at me, his face pale and strained. "I'm not walking away from you, Sarah. I'm just walking away from the idea of this life. I can't keep pretending like I'm happy, like I'm the father I should be. I'm not the person I thought I was, and I need to figure that out." I stood there, stunned and unable to move, as his words reverberated in my mind. He was leaving. After everything we'd been through, after everything we'd built together, he was leaving. "You're just going to leave me here? Alone with our son?" The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I could see the guilt flash in his eyes. But it wasn't enough to stop him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "But I don't know what else to do. I can't keep living a lie. I need to find myself again, and I can't do that here, with you, with the baby. I need space. I need to figure out who I am outside of this family, outside of being your husband." Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I wasn't going to cry in front of him, not now, not when he had already made up his mind. "You're really doing this? You're really leaving us?" "I don't want to hurt you, Sarah. I don't. But I'm not happy. And I can't keep pretending I am." He stood there for a moment, as if waiting for me to say something, anything that would change his mind. But I couldn't. I couldn't find the words. All I could feel was this overwhelming sense of loss, of disbelief, as if the ground had been ripped out from under me. He turned to leave, but I stopped him, my voice shaking. "Where are you going? What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just need some time. Some space." And just like that, he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, and for a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the empty space he had left. The weight of his absence hit me like a tidal wave, crashing over me and leaving me breathless. He was gone. My husband, the man I had promised to share my life with, had walked out. And in his place, I was left standing with a newborn, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. I sat down on the couch, Ethan cradled in my arms, and I couldn't help but think of all the moments that had led to this. The signs, the moments when I should have seen it coming. The little things that I had brushed aside, thinking it was just a phase, that everything would be okay. But it wasn't okay. And now, here I was, alone, with only the quiet sound of my baby's breath to remind me that I wasn't completely lost. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let Michael's decision define me. I had Ethan to think about. I had to be strong, for him if not for myself. The path ahead would be hard, but I wasn't alone. Not anymore. It's been a few months now since Michael left, and if I'm being honest, life hasn't been easy. The first few weeks were a blur of exhaustion, trying to juggle being a mother to Ethan and dealing with the emotional weight of losing my husband. I remember the nights when I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where I went wrong, questioning everything. But slowly, something inside me shifted. I realized I couldn't keep dwelling on the past or the things I couldn't change. I had to move forward, for myself, for Ethan. It wasn't an easy decision, but I started looking for a new place to live. The apartment where I was staying wasn't ideal, it reminded me too much of what I had lost. And even though it wasn't the life I had imagined, I couldn't stay stuck in the place where everything had fallen apart. I needed to rebuild, not just for my sake, but for Ethan's. I needed to show him that life didn't end when things got tough. That even when everything seems broken, there's still hope. Finding a new home was a huge step, but it was also a symbol of the strength I had found in myself. The day we moved into the small, cozy house I'd rented was the first time I felt a real sense of peace. There was something about starting fresh, about creating a space for Ethan and me that was ours, that made me feel like I was regaining control. The house wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And it was a place where we could start over. It wasn't just the physical space I was rebuilding, it was my life. I began to focus on myself in a way I hadn't before. I found the time to reconnect with friends I had lost touch with, those who had been there for me during the roughest moments of my life. We laughed together, shared stories, and I realized that I wasn't as alone as I had once believed. My friendships were a lifeline, reminding me that I had support, even if it wasn't from the man I had thought would always be by my side. I also started thinking about my career again. After Ethan was born, I'd put my job on hold, trying to focus on being a mom and keeping our family together. But now, with things changing, I realized that I could pursue my passions and dreams, too. It wasn't easy to find time for everything, but with some careful planning, I started taking small steps toward reigniting my career. It wasn't about proving anything to Michael or anyone else, it was about proving to myself that I was capable of more than I had given myself credit for. Then, one day, I received a text message. It was from Michael. My heart skipped a beat as I opened the message, unsure of what to expect. "I'm sorry," it read. "I've been thinking a lot, and I realize now what I've done. I was wrong. I never should have walked away. I've been selfish, and I've hurt you and Ethan. I don't know if I can fix this, but I want to try. If you'll let me." The message caught me off guard. I had never expected to hear from him again, not after everything that had happened. My first instinct was to throw the phone across the room, to ignore him completely. But as I sat there, staring at the screen, I realized something important. I didn't need him to fix my life. My life wasn't broken. I had already started putting the pieces back together, and I had done it without him. I thought about everything we had gone through, the pain, the heartache, the overwhelming feeling of being abandoned. But I also thought about how far I had come, how strong I had become in the face of it all. I had learned to stand on my own, to trust myself again, and to believe that I was enough, with or without Michael. So, I didn't reply to his message right away. Instead, I took a long, deep breath, knowing that I had to choose carefully how to move forward. Michael might have been a part of my past, but he no longer controlled my future. If he wanted to be a part of Ethan's life, if he wanted to be a part of mine, he would have to prove it. But I wasn't willing to let my happiness, my future, depend on him. I went to bed that night feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. I wasn't holding on to the past anymore. I had let go of the anger, the disappointment, and the hurt. And I had made room for something better. For myself. The next morning, as I watched Ethan laugh and play in the yard of our new home, I knew that no matter what happened with Michael, I was going to be okay. We were going to be okay. Life had thrown me some unexpected challenges, but I had faced them head-on. I had survived, and I was stronger because of it. In the end, the lesson I learned wasn't about what Michael did or didn't do. It was about rediscovering who I was and what I was capable of. And that, more than anything, gave me the courage to look ahead and embrace whatever the future held, on my terms. Subscribe to our channel for powerful real stories that touch your heart. Join a community where emotions run deep and every story brings a new perspective. Don't miss out, hit that bell for weekly updates.